Linny.
Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 112 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
So, Linny, I hear you've had some more acting gigs.
Well, I'm in a funeral scene.
All right, what's this for?
It's for an indie film, and it takes place in Pennsylvania. So I didn't have to go to LA or any place. And I'm sitting in a church. Dressed in black. And I'm just sitting there looking very sad. That's about it, Nance.
How long did your gig last?
It was just 2 hours, and the second scene was outside the church, just us greeting the family. Now, I might not be in any scene. It's hard to know.
When you do these, do you know the name of the film? Are you allowed to say the name of the film?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's called Things Left Unsaid. What it is a lady dies, and then the adult children who are estranged get back together and figure things out. But when the daughter speaks at the funeral, she uses that. Mom, there were things left unsaid between us. So that's near the end of the film. I think we're an hour and 20 minutes in when the funeral hits.
Okay.
So it was fun. I'm doing it for the arts, Nance. Just for the arts. To support the art. Like you do in Nebraska.
Yep.
You're supporting the arts. I'm supporting the arts by sitting in a church and looking sad. And I know how to dress for a funeral.
So speaking of supporting the arts, I think when we drop this episode, this will be right before our next annual governor's lecture for the humanities here in Nebraska. The lecture this year is going to feature 2 Native Americans who are involved in the film industry. We're going to have Zahn McLarnon, who is a Native actor who stars in Dark Winds and was also on Reservation Dogs and also in season 2 of Fargo. He is a tremendous actor. I think anyone who has seen Dark Winds, Reservation Dogs, or Fargo will know who I'm talking about. Just a brilliant actor. He's going to be joined by Bird Running Water, who was the co-director of Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford for many years, as well as producing lots of his own work. So I think that's going to be fascinating. So that's how I'm supporting the arts in the next month.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah.
You trumped me, Nance.
No, I don't think that's true. No, I'm not saying it to try to trump you. I'm saying there are 2 different ways of supporting the arts.
Oh, okay.
You're actually contributing to the arts. What I did, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, is I went up to the venue in Omaha and tasted the possible dinner selections.
Oh.
Help select what we're having for dinner that night. So
that's a tough gig.
You might have had a more substantive contribution than I did.
No, picking out dinner sounds great.
But I do love being on the Humanities Nebraska board.
Yes, it's so wonderful that you're doing that and bringing the arts to life in Nebraska.
Well, speaking of the arts, today we interview Taiwo Bello about Half of a Yellow Sun. I love this interview because neither you nor I knew anything about the Nigerian Civil War. Taiwo is able to give us the context of this and walk us all the way from the roots of the problem all the way to present day Nigeria.
Then we talk about what lessons we can learn so that we don't make those same mistakes.
Yeah. And he's really the perfect person to talk with us. He's an assistant professor of African history and an affiliate faculty member of the Africana Studies Center at Oklahoma State University. His research and teaching interests encompass gender and women's history, war and security, violence and conflict studies, the history of crime, law, and punishment, Black and diaspora studies, genocide, human rights, and humanitarian histories, as well as global and transnational history. He serves on the editorial review boards of the African Studies Association journal, History in Africa, published by Cambridge University Press, and the Canadian Association of African Studies journal, the Canadian Journal of African Studies, published by Taylor and Francis. He's a founding editor of Scholars Corner, a subsidiary blog of the journal Genocide Studies International, published by the University of Toronto Press. He's busy revising his second book entitled Soldiers on Rampage, Gender, Blockade, Violence, and Resistance in Biafra During the Nigerian Civil War, 1967 through 1970. The book examines the impact of the wartime violence between the Nigerian and Biafran soldiers on Biafran women and their families, and the women's responses to wartime atrocities. The book demonstrates how food was central to the constant violence unleashed on women in the heartland of Biafra. His first book, and it is forthcoming, is Inventing Order: Crime, Law, and Punishment in Nigeria and the Diaspora. It adopts a multidisciplinary approach to examine the evolution of crimes, armed robbery, immigration fraud, financial fraud, drug trafficking in Nigeria, and their local and global implications.
Okay, well, let's get to our interview, Nance.
Welcome, Taiwo, to the front porch.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're so happy that you could join us to help us understand this book a little bit better and to talk to us about Nigeria and the Biafran War. Can you tell us what led you to become a scholar of African history?
Thank you very much. I was born in Nigeria in the 80s. I did my primary education, secondary education up to college level in Nigeria. But becoming a scholar of African history was something that happened to me by choice. The dream of every young person growing up, I wanted to become an ambassador of my country, Nigeria.
Oh.
Growing up, trying to choose a field that was very close to becoming an ambassador, becoming a foreign emissary, I felt history would be a course to study, because within history, you find embedded diplomatic history. So that was what led me to the field of African history. So I wanted to understand Africa better. I wanted to understand Nigeria better. I wanted to understand even myself better.
You know, your childhood dream, it came true. Now you are really an ambassador.
Yes, an ambassador in the academic field, yes.
And then what was it about academia that captured you and you decided to really go more the scholarly path?
So I pursued the ambassadorial ambition for some time, but then I realized that it was going to be too complex for me because I needed to be connected to the people already in that sector.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the politics of becoming. So I felt, why don't you go into a field where you wouldn't need any human connection to become who you want to become?
Mm-hmm.
I felt, okay, yeah, I could teach. And I love research too. Why don't I just go back for my PhD and continue from there and become a professor?
Right. Well, I have to admit that Linny and I had never heard of Biafra and the Biafran War until we read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and then we were doing research on him and his other novels, and that's where we first came across it. Can you tell us what the roots of the Biafran-Nigerian War were?
Yes, the Nigeria-Biafra War, also called the Nigerian Civil War, and also known as the Biafran War, has very deep roots in colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Nigeria gained independence from the British on October 1st, 1960. The British came to colonize Nigeria in the late 19th century. But as we all know, that colonialism certainly had its own repercussions on the colonized.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the fact that the colonized were subjected to different types of violence, racial discrimination, amongst other things that we can think of. The colonial authorities also introduced certain policies that triggered more divisions. One of them was the amalgamation policy introduced by the British in 1914 through the action of one man, a British officer, Frederick Lord Lugard. So Frederick Lord Lugard sent to Nigeria to govern the country. He felt that the British were not realizing as much from the Northern Protectorate compared to the South, but they were spending almost equal amount of money in maintaining the two sides. So then he decided that in order for them to efficiently manage their resources, it would be reasonable to merge both the Southern and the Northern Protectorate together.
So this was completely an economic decision.
Yes. So that whatever money that was being generated from the South could be used to develop both the South and the North.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he did that. By doing that, he created a lot of problems for the people. The people who lived in the South, they were predominantly Christians, they were highly educated, and they were exposed to foreign culture, foreign education, and the like. But the people who lived in the North, they were predominantly Muslims. They didn't have access to as much education, and they were very conservative. So while the people from the South believed in rapid progress and constant change, those from the North, they preferred to conserve their culture, preserve their religion, their tradition, and also they prevented Christianity from infiltrating into their system. Of course, we already know what the result would be. Friction, tensions, disunity, misunderstanding, overreaction. But the British were very smart. They were able to manage the frictions. They were able to manage the people such that there was no major outbreak of violence amongst them. But the moment the British left, the different parties, the different ethnic groups began to ask questions as to whether it was a wise thing for them to remain in one space together.
When you say the North and the South, it was still a country of Nigeria, correct?
Yes.
So where does the word Biafra come from?
Yes. The word Biafra had been used since the period of the transatlantic slave trade. It was used in referencing the region that surrounded the southeastern part of Nigeria. The area used to be called the Bight of Biafra. The Bight of Biafra was one of the places that supplied slaves to the Atlantic world between the 15th and the 19th century. So by the time the Igbo people made up their mind to leave the Nigerian Federation, which they considered as a federation that was forced upon them by the British colonial authorities, they felt that returning to the name that the region used to be called would be the ideal thing to do.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then they did not call it the Bight of Biafra because it was called that way during the period of transatlantic slave trade. So they took out the Bight of and then they called it the Republic of Biafra. Before Biafra was declared on May the 30th, 1967, there were so many Igbo people living in the northern part of Nigeria. They were not northerners. They still retained their identity as Igbo.
So let's talk about the book.
Yes.
So in the book, then our families, our Igbo families, are in the north,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And that's why they're being murdered because they kind of don't belong there. Is that right?
A lot of things happen. The story of the violent attacks that the Igbo people witnessed in the northern part of Nigeria is very complex. And then we still have to trace it back to the amalgamation era that I talked about. So the people had been brought together. But by October the 1st, 1960, the country had gained its independence. Now, those who had been forcefully brought together and forcefully kept within the Federal Republic of Nigeria are asking questions. The Igbo people now are asking themselves whether they really belonged in the same space as the Hausas or the Fulani. And then the Yorubas are also asking questions as to whether we don't speak the same language, we don't have the same culture, we don't practice the same religion.
This is clearing it all up for me.
Yeah.
So what was the trigger in that massacre of Igbo people?
So what happened then was on January the 15th, 1966, the first major military coup that Nigeria would experience. That military coup was staged and championed by Kaduna Nzego from the Igbo ethnic group. Northerners were killed in that very coup, the Hausa Fulani people. And those were the people that dominated the northern part of Nigeria. And two of the key political and cultural figures from the northern part of the country were assassinated. Sir Ahmadu Bello, who was a cultural as well as a key political figure from the northern part of the country, was murdered cold-blooded. The Prime Minister of Nigeria, by the name Sir Tafawa Balewa, was also assassinated because of the fact that those key political and cultural figures were assassinated in a coup that was championed by an Igbo person. The Northerners became angry, now believing that the assassination was politically motivated to take them out of the political scene. And if you don't have access to political power, you would not have access to economic power. You won't have access to cultural or social power. So the Northerners felt they were losing everything because their leaders had been murdered. So what the military officers from the northern part of the country then did was to retaliate. Few months later, they reconvened, strictly Northerners. They came together and they decided to stage a counter coup on July 29, 1966, targeting the Igbo military officer who had declared himself as the military head of state.
But then why murder all of the civilians, the women, the children, the old people? They went way beyond just a military coup.
The initial reaction by the northern population towards the Igbo was to eject them from the northern part of Nigeria. But then you had certain individuals that hijacked the movement, and that led to the violence that claimed the lives of many Igbo people. The attacks spread across core major cities in northern part of the country, such that when they saw the presence of any Igbo person, violence would be launched against the person to a point of death. According to statistics, about 30,000 Igbo people, young people, old people, men, women, were murdered. And that happened between July and up till October of 1967. The majority of those who were attacked did not know anything about the first military coup and the second military coup. They were young children. They were just people living in the northern part of Nigeria working to survive. But unfortunately, they were consumed by that violence.
And this was just a spontaneous uprising of civilians against their Igbo neighbors.
Yes.
Wow.
It spread to civilian environments, and then suddenly it became a major issue for concern.
Well, this is tragic. There's a lot more people here that were killed than I think I realized reading the book.
Yeah.
But you really explained the backdrop, what happened and what led to this, it kind of put the pieces of the puzzle, like, where is this anger coming from and how is this happening to people? So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the impact of this on the people. You have a book. It's called Soldiers of Rampage, Gender, Blockade, Violence, Resistance in Biafra during Nigerian Civil War, 1967 and 1970. And you examine the impact of the war on the women specifically.
Yes.
And in Half of the Yellow Sun, we look at our sisters, Olana and Kayanini. How was their fictional experience similar to or different to what you learned in your research on the effects of this war on women?
Fiction would, on the one hand, it would have elements of reality. And on the other hand, it would have aspects where a real story is embellished. And that, I think, we saw in Half of a Yellow Sun. I would say that Chimamanda Adichie, of course, she's a respected novelist, and she's a very brilliant author as well, globally respected. She did a very good job in creating context to the war itself and painting a picture of life, showing vividly how the war disintegrated families, how the war disrupted a society that was, well organized, well put together. And suddenly the war broke out and turned everybody apart. Parents could not tell where their children were. Children could not trace the footpath of their parents. Families became disintegrated. People were hungry. Women were raped. Violence everywhere. People in Biafra experienced them. And she clearly and successfully painted those pictures in her book. So I give it to her on that hand. And she was also objective about the fact that rape against women in Biafra was not one-sided. It was not just the Nigerian soldiers that raped women. Some Igbo soldiers too, some Biafran soldiers too, raped women. That's her being objective, and that's good. That reveals what we know through interviews, through archival research and the likes. The results that I got from my research and the results and what she has said, we could see linkage in them. But on the other hand, the issue of starvation that she talked about a lot, I think there needs to be more context to that. We didn't see how Biafran officials also contributed to that. If we were to focus on this book, you would blame everything solely on the Nigerian government, who had imposed a blockade on Biafra, preventing food from entering into the enclave. But there was more to that. The blockade was imposed in order to ensure a quick surrender. But unfortunately, the Biafran soldiers did not surrender because they always found a way of getting access to food. But the ordinary people, children, women, they lacked access to food. But after the government of the United States, under President Nixon and the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, had realized that the starvation was claiming many lives, especially lives of women and children. They struck an agreement with the International Committee of the Red Cross, that's the ICRC. The goal of that proposal was to ensure that a corridor through which food could be taken into Biafra was created so that the people that were starving would gain access to food. They presented the proposal to the government of Nigeria and the government of Biafra. The government of Nigeria said, yes, okay, I will allow food to get into Biafra to feed the starving people, but on one condition. Every flight or ship or vehicle that was conveying food would be checked by members of the Nigerian authority. But then the Biafran government said no. And the question then became, why no? Because the government of Biafra wanted to continue to gain access to weapons that were being smuggled into Biafra through night flights. The government of Biafra knew that if they accepted that condition, the arms that they were using, they wouldn't be able to gain access to them anymore because it was through night flights. The reason given by the Biafran government was that they would never allow the Nigerian government to gain access to the food because they did not trust the Nigerian government to a point that they would not poison the food.
Right.
But indeed, that was not the major reason. The main reason was that they wanted to keep open the route through which they were getting secret arms into Biafra. But then, after the Biafran government raised that issue of food poisoning, the US government and the Canadian government offered their soldiers would monitor the food. But the Biafran government said no, because they knew that if that happened, the night flights through which they were bringing in harm would stop. And then that would mark the defeat of Biafra by Nigeria. As they were saying no to these offers, people were dying, children were dying, women were dying, the elderly were dying because they didn't have access to food. They didn't have access to medicine. They didn't have access to salts. They didn't have access to all the things that they needed to live like human beings, to live normal life. But that aspect is missing in the half of a yellow sun. That's part of the things that I've tried to uncover in my book. That look, when we try to apportion blame, we need to look at the role that each government played, not just putting the blame on one side.
I think one of the frustrating parts of the war, and certainly as it's represented in Half of a Yellow Sun, was the obliviousness of the northern Nigerians to the suffering of Biafrans during the war. So Muhammad, who was one of Olana's previous lovers, writes to her during the war and was talking about his polo games. And after the war, Miss Odebayo tells Odenigbo, and I'm quoting, "We didn't really understand what was happening in Biafra. Life went on and women were wearing the latest lace in Lagos." And it does remind me generally just of how countries use misinformation. And you're talking about Biafra saying, well, the reason we're not accepting the food is because it's probably being poisoned. And that shows up in Half the Yellow Sun, that it's that storyline that they accept. Yeah, they're trying to poison us. And it reminds me of how Russia is using misinformation to fool its citizens into believing Ukraine is the aggressor in this war, and how politicians and officials try to divide us by telling us it's these other people who are the problem, and we just need to get rid of them and our lives will be better. And how people believe politicians are doing things to help them that are actually harming them and are counter to the values that they hold. So this aspect of the book feels very contemporary to me. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on the resonance of this book to what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, it's very relevant. I mean, if we look around us today, anywhere that we turn to, in Gaza, people are dying, women are being killed, children are starving to death, hospitals are being bombed, homes are being bombed down and the likes. The same thing happened in Biafra. Homes were burnt down, hospitals were destroyed, bridges were destroyed, the waterways were blockaded, starvation everywhere. We saw children living with kwashiorkor and all forms of diseases, triggered by malnutrition. Yeah, and the same thing we see in Gaza today. The same thing we see in Israel, right? The same thing we see in Russia. We see in Ukraine. We see the same thing in the DRC today. The same thing in Sudan. Just what went on in Biafra still, replicates itself, still repeats itself. it then shows that we hardly learn from history.
Yes.
Despite that, history always comes at us, telling us that, look, if we do this, we are going to be like that. We are going to experience what certain people experienced 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. We don't listen to the nudge of history. And that's why we continue to have situations of violence, of war, of conflicts, some of them getting to genocidal proportion today.
They do. And I think that's why I feel like a book like Half of a Yellow Sun is so important, because it tells the story from the lives of everyday people.
Yeah.
And it's not some glorious leader taking control and heroic soldiers fighting. No, this is what happens to people and families in war. And there's government misinformation. There's horrible tragedies. People become people they don't even recognize because of what is happening to them and around them. There's nothing glorious about it.
Yeah, there isn't. There isn't. So the approach she used, which is normal, is the approach of war and society, not the approach of militarism itself.
Right.
Because if we want to understand the impact of war on people, like everyday people, especially women and children, who become helpless in war situation, we need to apply that very approach, the approach of war and society. That's the only way we can understand the extent of devastation that war causes to the lives of people. War destroys lives. It halts people's lives goals. Children no longer be able to go to school. They won't be able to go about their normal lives. There will be fears everywhere. There will be tensions everywhere. They would not have access to food. They won't be able to dream anymore. Their lives would just stop. And the same thing with women. They won't be able to do anything to. And these are the people that I talk about in my book, how the war shapes them. But at the same time, unlike some of the existing work, which did not prioritize the agency of women, I ensure that I bring out the agency of women in that war. The women were not just victims. They were not just sitting down there dying and the likes. They went out to get food for their family members, despite that many of them died. And that's the actions or the contributions of those women helped reduce the impact of the starvation on the Biafran populace. Yeah. We hardly talk about that. Oftentimes, we rationalize them or analyze them as victims of war. But my own research shows that the women were beyond being victims.
I do like how in Half of a Yellow Sun, Chimamanda, she shows Olana as finding herself and her own power during the war, because there is no one who's going to help her. If she's going to survive, if baby's going to survive, if Ugu's going to survive, she's going to be the one who is going to go out there and find them food and shelter and everything else. Yeah. So I love that your research is focusing on women keeping themselves and their loved ones and their neighbors alive.
Yes, the women ensured that they did that. Kept the markets running, and it was through the markets that Biafran children, Biafran soldiers, and others would go to and get food. The women had to travel long distance to smuggle food into Biafra. They would supply the foods to children, to anybody who was in need. And I'm also making an argument in my book that the survival of the Biafran state rested on the shoulder of women. That if those women had not risen to the responsibility of caring for Biafran civilians and Biafran soldiers, Nigeria would have won that war within the first few weeks of its outbreak.
Huh.
We cannot understand the war as well as the resilience put up by the Biafran state and its soldiers without paying attention to the roles of women.
Yeah.
The end of the war, the book carries on a little bit how people are recovering. And do you have any specific information you can share on how did people get their lives together, the women come together, build a new community, start over, and how are things in Nigeria today?
Yeah, I mean it was very difficult in the immediate post-war era, right? It was difficult for people to return to their homes because there was no home in sight to be identified. Most of those homes had been destroyed by bombs. Everything razed down. So there was no home to go back to. But how did they rebuild? The rebuilding of that society also rested on the shoulders of women. There was an organization called Christian Council of Nigeria. The Christian Council of Nigeria worked side by side with the women to rebuild the society. It was not Igbo men that rebuilt the society. It was the women. The women had to return to farming because remember that the war claimed the lives of many men as well, especially the ones that went to war. And the ones that did not lose their lives, they were rendered handicapped. They couldn't do anything. Some of them lost their hands. Some of them had become blind. Some of them could not work. Some of them were still living through the trauma. So it was the women who still had their heads and their brains and their minds, even though they were also traumatized. They were the ones who still had some level of confidence to move around and help rebuild the society. So they returned to markets and started bringing goods into their community for people to access, especially men who couldn't do anything anymore because the war had changed their lives. And it was the women who also returned to farm so that people would gain access to food. It was the women who started working alongside the Christian Council of Nigeria to rebuild some of the houses that were destroyed during the war. It was difficult to rebuild, but through the support that the women got from organizations, especially the Christian Council of Nigeria, they were able to slowly rebuild their society. So to go back to the question of what life is like today, life has returned to normal. Of course, you will still see signs of the impact of the war because there are certain places that were burnt down or destroyed. They are still there. But looking at the society generally, it looks good and it looks well put together, even though the people in it are still living through the trauma of the war. I interviewed people, women who witnessed the war. During our interviews, those women would cry, they would shed tears, just talking about their experiences. You could see that the trauma is still there. That's why we still have groups fighting for the secession of Biafra today. It's difficult to let go of it. And it's also because the successive governments of Nigeria have not done anything to help the situation of these people. Because those who are fighting now for the secession of Biafra are saying that the government has left them without nothing, that the discrimination, the economic discrimination that was part of the issues that led to the war is still ongoing till date, that they are still being marginalized. Why live in a society that doesn't prioritize your welfare, your survival, your everything?
And how would you characterize the ethnic and religious state? Is there still a division between the North and the South, between Christian and Muslim, between educated and less educated? Do those rifts continue, or have they been overtaken more by just pure economic concerns?
We still have all those tensions. There's still lack of trust between and amongst the different ethnic groups. A typical Igbo person would not profess trust for a typical Hausa person from the north.
Okay.
A typical Hausa person from the north would not say, yes, I trust this person with my life. It still goes back to the failure of the leaders of the past to bring people together and make them see a common goal in living within a federation. Let them see why they need to live together.
So, what would be your prescription for healing over some of those animosities, reducing some of the division to bring more lasting peace and reconciliation to Nigeria?
Yeah. First one, we need to stop politicizing the lives of our people.
Yeah.
A lot of people are profiting from the division,
Yes.
especially politicians. If you are from the north, you want to gain the support of your people, and in the end, you begin to campaign against those from the south,
Yes.
saying, "Oh, these people they don't want us." Another thing is we need to have a national language of developments. Development should not be one-sided. When a government wants to embark on a project, be clear that, look, we are all going to benefit from this. This is not a project that is just going to benefit one part of the country or one region, while it leaves the other region impoverished, backward. That sense of equity would help people to get into the mood of seeing themselves as part of the nation. But today, there's no sense of nationhood because they feel like, look, we don't belong. And we also need to talk less about what religion is good and what religion is bad.
Oh, yeah.
By seeing everybody as, one. Whether you're a Muslim or you're a Buddhist or whatever, you are a human being first before your religion. So we need to see people for who they are, not see them for the types of religions that they practice. Because if we begin to see people based on the religions that they practice, if anybody who is practicing the same religion does something bad, then we begin to see, shut up. No, you see now, this is the problem. The Muslims are the problems of this country. The Christians are the problems. And in a place where that exists, there's no way we can talk about unity. There are so many approaches, so many things that the leaders of Nigeria can do to ensure that, and they know all these things, but they would not do them because doing them would affect their political opportunities. They thrive on division. If people are not divided, if people are united, then there's no way they will be able to get votes. There's no way they will be able to get more followers. There's no way they will be able to get people that would fight for them and campaign for them and the like. Ethnic tension actually plays in their favor, in the favor of the politicians. That's why we are where we are today. Someone like me cannot go to the northern part of Nigeria and expect them to see me as their brother. They will see me as, he's from Lagos. He's from, they're not going to see me as a Nigerian like they are. A northerner in the south too would consider himself as a foreigner in the south.
Wow.
It's different in the US here, where if you are living where you are now, Nebraska, right?
I'm Nebraska. Linda's Pennsylvania.
Or Pennsylvania, right? So if you're living in Nebraska and you're going to Pennsylvania, nobody is going to see you as a stranger.
Right.
You are still an American. If you go to New York, it's the same thing. Although we have here the South, North, whatever divide, it's not common. You won't hear people talk. But someone from the North coming to Lagos, the person would be seen as a stranger, as if the person needs a passport or residence permit to live in Lagos. It's the same thing.
Wow.
Solid from the South goes to the North. So that division, that we need to grow beyond that. So those are the approaches I think that our governments can take to bring people together. And also they need to ensure that people are educated on the impact of war, of violence, of ethnic division on their lives, because the majority of those who are fighting today for a separate state of Biafra, they are not educated about the past. They don't know the extent to which the war shaped the lives of their people. They don't know the extent of destruction caused by the war. They don't know how many billions wasted on that war. They don't know the statistics of people that were lost in that war. So in a situation whereby you don't know the implication or repercussions of your action, you will just be doing whatever you feel is right.
Yeah.
So there's need for more Nigerians to be educated about the history of the war and generally the history of the country itself, how it came into being, the impact of colonialism, what happened after colonization, the coup itself, and how people responded to it. So having a good knowledge of history would help us to prevent another major war.
Well, speaking of history, you have 2 forthcoming books. Why don't you tell us what you're working on now and those 2 books and any other research that you're undertaking?
Next year, my book, Inventing Order, will be out. Inventing Order traces the evolution of crime in Nigeria, linking all the types of crime to development in the diaspora. And when I say diaspora, I'm looking at the spread, how those crimes that evolved in Nigeria spread to Asia. I used India as case study in Asia. To Europe, I used Britain as a case study. And then North America, the United States, as a case study. So it looks at the implications of the criminal activities of some Nigerians on the societies in those places. In the United States, in the 90s, we are talking about drug problem.
Mm-hmm.
The book shows how some Nigerian drug dealers contributed to that epidemic and how drugs influenced the social fabrics of the United States, the Great Britain, and India as of this time. It's a book about the problems of immigration. It touches on the issues of credit card fraud and how all these things shaped the lives of the innocent victims.
Yeah.
And then the other one I talked about it, Soldiers on Rampage, which is the one that is focusing on the Nigerian Civil War, on women and children in the Nigerian Civil War. But I have a number of other book projects that I'm working on as well. One is focusing on the responses of Nigeria to imperialism in Africa, how the Nigerian government and its people helped to liberate countries on the Southern African corridor
Oh, wow.
from colonialism and South Africa's imperialism, as well as the Rhodesian governments at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The different diplomatic actions of the Nigerian government in that sense. That book is also completed too. So I have the third one ready, but I'm working on the fourth one, the fourth and the fifth one. Fourth one is focusing on the American Committee on Africa. You may have heard of ACOA. ACOA was an American organization founded during the period of anti-apartheid struggle.
Uh-huh.
ACOA helped in facilitating the colonization of many countries on the continent of Africa, including Zimbabwe, South Africa itself, Namibia, and the like.
Huh.
ACOA raised a lot of money from the American people, and then it would use the money to advocate for the people there. They did a whole lot of infrastructural development campaigns against the Portuguese, campaigns against South Africa and the likes. Yeah, so I'm looking at the roles that ACOA and the American people played in the liberation of countries in Africa between the 60s and 90s.
Okay.
The second book that I'm working on now looks at the experiences of the African refugees from Southern Africa in Nigeria, and as well as their contributions to development of Nigeria during the time that they were there. Because during the period when Zimbabwe, for instance, was fighting for independence, a lot of people were displaced. During the time when Namibia was fighting for its independence from South Africa, a lot of people were displaced. People were also displaced in South Africa. The same thing in Angola, and the same thing in Mozambique. So a lot of the people that were displaced were admitted into Nigeria by the Nigerian government. They were fed, they were taken care of until their countries gained independence. Then they returned home.
Wow.
So I'm looking at their experiences while in Nigeria and how they contributed.
You're a busy guy.
Yeah, I tried.
That's a lot. I thought maybe one book, but you got like 5. That's just amazing.
Yeah, I completed 3. Now I'm working on 2.
Well, what's the best way for our listeners to stay in touch and abreast on what's going on with you?
I'm on Facebook, Taiwo Bello. That's my Facebook name. If anybody types Taiwo Bello on Facebook search, I'm gonna come up. That guy with big head. Yeah, I'm very, very constant on Facebook.
Okay.
They could reach out to me via email too. tbello@okstate.edu. tbello@okstate.edu.
That's great. I can provide links in our show notes page also on that.
Yeah, that works.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was
Thank you very
fascinating.
much.
Really helped us understand the context of our book this month.
Thank you.
Boy, you're right about history. I mean, the more that we understand the history, the nuances, what's happening, the more we can reflect on what's happening today and how can we avoid the errors of past generations.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It was lovely meeting you.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed our session. Thank you.
Okay, Nancy. When he started out, he said that his childhood wish was to become an ambassador. Don't you think he is?
He definitely is.
Oh,
talk about someone who is able to speak for his nation and his people and help other people understand.
Yeah, point on. That's where he wanted to go. And he felt like history and then the system of education would get him there. And I'm thinking, yeah, it got you exactly where you wanted to go. You're a little boy with this thing on your heart. This was your passion, and he was able to do it. What I really liked is what we can learn from all of this. Yes, it was a good history lesson. He's a history teacher. I think I was a pretty good student. He cleared things up for me and he taught me. But what I thought was interesting are the parallels that are still in place today on politics, fear, division, divisiveness, putting one party against the other, villainization of the parties going on today in the United States and around the world. Have we not learned?
No. And the reason these things happen is because they're a very effective cudgel.
I would say that is, yeah.
It appeals to our little reptile brain. Fear, division, them versus us. And we are in search of simple solutions to complex issues. And someone comes along and says, they're the problem. I can fix it for you. It's this 1 or 2 simple things I can do, and that will fix everything that I have taught you to fear. It's very effective.
Yep. I'm going to continue to think about this and how I can be a better citizen in the midst of this muck that the United States is in, and how I can address it on my little level here in Pennsylvania, in a little subdivision in a little house. But I have a voice.
You do. And I would love to hear more about your thoughts and your actions that this initiates.
Yeah.
How much did your little heart warm at hearing about the role of the International Red Cross in attempting to create a corridor for food?
Yeah, that did. And it did in the book as well. But she then just said, it stopped. Obviously, we're not going in there with machine guns.
No.
You have to have some kind of escort, you know?
Right. Right.
The other thing I wanted to say is his focus on women, not only in the books that he was writing, but in our discussion today. A lot of times to bring up women's studies, what were women? It's a woman who does that.
That's true.
I loved that it was a man who was recognizing this and that was researching this and was bringing this to light.
I love that, Linny. You're right. You can tell he's quite a champion for women.
Yes. Love that.
Yeah, that was great to see.
Well, now let's think about our next book, Nance.
Okay.
We were in Africa. Now we're going to look at Crazy Rich Asians. Now, there was a movie, and I've already seen this movie. It was out a couple years ago.
Have you? I have not seen the movie.
Yeah, it was out a couple years ago.
Okay.
So I'm not running into this blind, which I do on pretty much every book that we do. And this was a fun movie. The author is Kevin Kwan, and I have not downloaded it yet, but I will, and I'm excited to read it.
I'm about halfway through, and I would say if I was to do this over again, this would have been a great summertime read for you.
Oh, yes.
It's very different from any of the books, especially that we've done this year.
Oh, yeah.
We've had a lot of heavy topics, a lot of heavy books. This is a fun, lighthearted read. When you said you saw this movie, that made me think there was a movie made of Half of a Yellow Sun, and I haven't watched it yet, but I want to watch it.
You know what, Nance? I didn't say anything, but I think I saw this movie.
Oh, did you?
And I remember turning it off because I was so disgusted by what was happening. And I'm like,
Wow.
What in the world is this? This is not entertainment. Who are these people? Why are they doing this to each other? I'm sure it was this movie.
Yeah.
But now that I know the history and what's really going on and more of the story than the little segment that I saw,
Right.
I think I'm going to look for that and watch that. Maybe I'll do that tonight.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to try to find it too and watch it. And there's some really good actors in it too.
They seem very believable to me.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. Our website is frontporchbookclub.com.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of every month.
See you next time, Linny.
See you, Nance.